So Naomi had been left in the land of Moab, a land away from her home, without her husband, Elimelech, and not only that, but without her two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. However, she wasn't alone. She was left with two women, the two women who had married her sons, her daughters-in-law. Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth were left incredibly sad because of what had happened to their family. One day, Naomi decided that she wanted to return to Bethlehem, her hometown. Now, it wasn't where Orpah and Ruth were from, they were from Moab, where they were currently living. But there was a reason why Naomi decided that she wanted to leave Moab and return home. You see, the reason that she and Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion had left Bethlehem in the first place was because of a famine, because there was no food. But you see, Naomi had heard word, heard stories, heard people telling the news that food had returned to Bethlehem. So, with food now back in Bethlehem, Naomi packed up all of her things, everything that she had, her belongings, everything that had been a part of her home in Moab, and set out to return to Bethlehem. Orpah and Ruth did the same, packing up all that was theirs and set off on the road with Naomi. Partway along the road, partway through their journey, Naomi turned to Orpah and Ruth and said, Orpah, Ruth, Bethlehem is not your home. Bethlehem is my home, but Moab is your home. You should turn back. You should stay in your homeland. Who knows? One day you might find somebody different to marry. But you should not come with me. Let me go back to Bethlehem, my homeland, on my own, and you two stay in your homeland of Moab. All three of them were already incredibly sad. But this made Orpah and Ruth even more sad. You see, they loved Naomi. They had grown to love her. They had become a part of her family. And even though they no longer had their husbands, Mahlon and Chilion, they still felt that they belonged with Naomi. However, Orpah hugged Naomi, kissed her, and crying said a final goodbye. And with that, Orpah turned back and went back the way that they had just come along the road to Moab. However, things were slightly different with Ruth. You see, Ruth hugged Naomi and wouldn't let her go. Ruth refused to go back to Moab. Don't tell me to leave you, Ruth said to Naomi. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people. And your God will be my God. When Naomi saw that Ruth was absolutely determined to stay with her, they remained together and set off along the road to Bethlehem. When they arrived back at the town of Bethlehem, the people who lived there couldn't believe their eyes. They said, "Is this Naomi, who left years and years ago with her family? Has she come back?" Naomi looked different and seemed different from what she was when she left Bethlehem because she had become so sad. However, she wasn't alone. Ruth was with her. So Naomi has returned to Bethlehem. Last week we learned that when she and her husband Elimelech left Bethlehem, really they were turning their back on God. So this week we're seeing the reverse of that. We're seeing Naomi turning back towards God, turning back to God's people and returning to the land where she truly belonged. But of course Naomi isn't returning on her own, is she? She's returning with Ruth, her daughter-in-law. And Ruth is the really incredible part of this story, because you see, Ruth had been brought up in the land of Moab. This was a land where people followed fake gods, and people followed idols, and people worshipped fake gods and idols, where people really didn't believe in the real God, the God of heaven, the God who had proved that he was true and that he was real. People in Moab really didn't have any time for the real God, and this was the land that Ruth had been brought up in. It was the land that Ruth had grown up in. But now Ruth is making the decision to go to Bethlehem with Naomi. Naomi is returning to the land that she was brought up in. She's returning to her home. She's returning to where she probably should have been all along. Ruth, however, is different. Ruth, even when Naomi tells her to return to her homeland in Moab, Ruth is making a huge decision to turn away from her homeland and to go to Bethlehem with Naomi. And really what Ruth is doing here is she is trusting the true God. She is trusting the real God. She says to Naomi, doesn't she, don't tell me to leave you. Don't tell me to go back to my homeland of Moab. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. So what Ruth is saying there is, Naomi, I'm with you. I'm not leaving you. Wherever you are, I'll be there with you. Wherever you choose to stay, that's where I am going to stay too. And then she says, your people will be my people. And remember, Naomi's people were God's people. That was the people that she was brought up amongst. That was the people that she had lived amongst. She was an Israelite. She was one of God's people. So when Ruth says, your people will be my people, what Ruth is saying is, I want to be a part of God's people. I want to be with God's people. And then finally she says, your God will be my God. And what Ruth is saying there is that she's turning her back on the fake gods of her homeland and the idols, and she's turning away from that once and for all, and she's turning to the real God. And it's a wonderful decision. Just like Naomi and Elimelech leaving Bethlehem was a bad decision, Ruth here is making the best decision that she could possibly make. And as we'll see through the rest of these stories, God welcomes Ruth into his family. God welcomes Ruth into his people, because Ruth is showing trust in a God that she wasn't brought up with. She's showing trust in a God that she knows is real. And she's making that decision not based on what she was brought up with, not based on the people that she lived amongst and she grew up amongst. She's making that decision as an individual. We need to be like Ruth. There is only one real and true God. There are plenty of fake ones, but there's only one real one. Ruth chose to trust him, and we need to trust him too. It's the only way for us to be rescued from what we truly deserve. The only way. And if we trust in the true and the real God, then, like Ruth, he'll welcome us. He'll allow us to enter into his family, into his kingdom, and into his people. So we need to be like Ruth. We need to trust in the one true and real God.